Hello and welcome to lesson 1 of week 6. In this lesson, we are going to look at the document object model. My name is Mildred. We are going to look at how we can use the DOM to access elements and to modify, style, add or remove HTML elements from a document. So when we talk about the document object model, what we mean is the interface the browser provides that allows JavaScript to access, to modify, to manipulate the content, the structure and the style of HTML elements. Now the DOM represents an HTML document, and this document is like a tree of nodes. The nodes consist of the elements, the text and the attributes. Each HTML element will become a node object, and this object can be accessed and manipulated using JavaScript. So what you need to bear in mind is that the DOM is part of a web standard, and it enables dynamic updates to both HTML and CSS and the content, and it is the bridge between JavaScript and the web page. So the structure is such that when you have an HTML document, you have a tree-like structure from the HTML elements to the head, everything that comes within the head, the body, and everything within the body. Okay, so the node of the DOM is the document node, which represents the whole HTML document, and then we have the element node that represents the HTML element, and then we have the text node that represents the text inside an element. Like if you have a p tag and you have a text between the start and end p tag, that is a text node. And then the attribute node represents attributes like the ID attribute, the class attributes and the likes. So in DOM, all HTML elements are defined as objects. Let's start with an example, and I'm going to have this on the example.html page here. I want to have an ID. Let's say p ID is equal to, let's give this ID para1, and we close the paragraph. Let's have another paragraph tag with the class attributes p class is equal to para2 close p. Let's give all the p tags with class of para2. Let's make it like 3 of them. So we want to look at how we can access the different HTML elements by different means. We can access by the ID. When we do documents, let's add the example.js here. So let's say script source and close. So here we want to access by ID. So let's get a variable, and we call this para1 is equal to. So we use document dot get element by ID, and then you want to, in the pair of parentheses, write the ID. We want to get the document whose ID has a value of para1. So we use the documents.get element by ID. The get element by ID is the method that we use to access the element whose ID is para1. So the get element by ID is written in camel case, which means the first start with lowercase and then subsequent words start with uppercase, like that. ID is always unique, and so it's just singular. So let's say we want to use this and say in the inner HTML, so between the start and end tag of the element that has the ID of para1, we want to insert something. And so we have a property that we can use to access it called inner HTML. So para1.inner HTML, and this is a property, is equal to, so between the start and end of that paragraph, we want to do something, and we want to say this is the first paragraph. So when we come to our web page, we'll see that it has this is the first paragraph. So you see that on the HTML page there is no text, but we use JavaScript to insert a text to that. So get element by ID is one way of accessing the DOM element. We can use get element by class name. So this is going to be plural because class is not unique. Several elements can have the same class values. So we say documents.get elements in plural by class name, and we want the class of para2. So we have 3 elements that has the class para2, and this is going to return a collection, which is going to be like a list that we can loop through. So let's say we don't want to do this, and we want to get all the elements that has a class attribute with the value of para2, and let's say we want to loop through using the for loop. Let's say for let I is equal to 0, let's say I is less than para.length I++, and we want to say para2 I.inner HTML. We want to write this paragraph uses the class attribute. So we have 3 of these, and we are looping through each of them. We say, so here it's supposed to be para2, not para1, so para2.length. So constant para2, we said para1. So constant para2, document.get elements by class name para2. Alright, and so when we refresh now, we have it 3 times because we have 3 of the paragraphs with the class whose value is para2. We can get it by tag name. If we say we want to access all of the p tags, or let's just use h1 tag, we want to get all the tags that are h1, for instance, and we want to do something with it. Maybe we want to change the style or something. Let's do this. Let's say document, let's say constant headings, document.get element by, so get elements by tag name, and then you put the tag here. So maybe you want to get all the h1 tags like this, and then you can do something with it because it is now saved here. It will also return a collection because we're going to have several items with that tag, and if not, it will still return a collection and you can access it like you accessed a list or an array. So we have to get by the CSS selector. So we have two ways. If you want to get only the first match, you use query selector, like document.query selector, and then you put the, so let me say .para1, something like that. So you're getting this by the CSS selector, so you're trying to get just the first match. So when you use query selector, you get the first match. If you use query selector all, you're going to get the node list of all the matches. Okay, so this is for plural, you're getting more than one. And let's say you want to get let's use all of the p elements that is within a div tag and things like that. So there are different ways that we can manipulate the DOM. We can change the text content like what we just did about the inner HTML. We can also change the attributes using something we call set attributes like this. Okay, and then you put the attributes, maybe we put ID and then something, let's just say new ID. You also use get attributes to get just one parameter ID. You can use remove attributes. We can change the style, and when we want to change the style, we do something like the element name, let's say p.style.color, and we'll look at this in next week's lesson when we deal with forms and we're doing with form validation. You can change the style like this. So say for the p tag, we change the style to red. You can change the background. So when you put some style dot the name of the CSS property, maybe background color like this. Okay, so we have all of these different things that we have. We can also create elements using document.create element, and then in the pair of parentheses, you are going to put the element you want to create, maybe div. Now it will be best that we do this in a lab, and we are going to work with a lab, and in this lab we are going to look at how we can manipulate the DOM. So we want to click on this button and be able to change the text. We want to type something here and change from hello stranger to whatever name we type here. We use event, so when we click on toggle it should change, and we want to be able to create, add and remove items here. So let's do a lab. In your lesson resource, you have the example of all of the different DOM traversal that we can use, elements.parent nodes or child nodes and children first child and all of that. You are required to go through your notes and try the examples. You also have sample HTML and CSS files that you can use to do something like this, and then we'll write the JavaScript in this lab that we're trying to do. So let's go to the files. I'm going to be using the domscript.js file here, and I want you to see what the HTML looks like and the CSS looks like. Okay, so we'll have an HTML file that references the CSS file and it references the script. So we're going to use the script, and that is the file that you can see here. So we want to make this work. So let's say the first thing we want to do is to change the selector. Now you see we have query selector and then we have query selector all. I want to write a variable. I want to represent this by maybe a $sign, so it can be like a shorthand, and I want to represent this by $sign to be another shorthand. So let's say this will be constant $sign is equal to selector equal to selector, which is, now I'm going to say this is document dot query selector and selector. So you understand the arrow syntax. The arrow syntax is like you have your parameter. This is the parameter we want to have, then the arrow, then you put your expression or function here, and then if it's a function, you have your function definition. So the arrow syntax is just like a shorthand way of writing stuff. So we want to assign this to a variable that we call a $sign, and this is the parameter selector. What we want to do is documents.query selector, and we want in the parentheses what the selector that we are querying is. So the same thing we want to do here. So I don't want to have to write this long documents.query selector, so I'll make this. So the parameter will be selector, and I will do document.query selector or selector. So we've gotten this out of the way. This is just a helper save selector to just change it. You can leave it like that and always use documents.query selector in your file, but I just made this a shorthand. So the first thing we want to do is to manipulate this to be able to change this text. When we go to our HTML file, we'll see that we have this paragraph tag with the ID of intro. We have the button with the ID of change text button. So we know the ID, and that this section collection has an ID of manipulation. We want to be able to reference these IDs when we are working. So let's write the IDs here so we can come back to it as a comment. So we say the first one is manipulation. We have another ID that is intro, and we have another ID that is change text button, change text btn. So we have all of this. Now it's time for us to create our text, right? We want to select the element. We want to first of all get this button so that when we click the button, it changes this text. So let's say constant change text button is equal to, now we can write documents.query selector here and put the selector. We can do something like this. If I didn't have this, I can do documents.query selector, and what I'm going to be querying is, it has the ID attribute, so we'll put the hash sign, and the value is change text button xbtn. Okay, so you can do it like this, which is just unnecessarily long, or because we now know that this is the $sign, it makes this easy. We'll only use $sign here like this. So you see why I just did a helper. So you can create as many helpers as possible to make things really short. Like for this one now, I put double $sign. I say selector is equal to. Now, because this is always going to return a collection, I want you to pay attention to this. It's going to return a collection, not just one item. So it's going to be a collection, is like an array. It's like a list. So you say array dot from. Okay, so this will now be an array like this. So pay attention to this. The first time I did it, so we can explain what it returns as we go along. Now, this is returning every match. So there'll be several in an array. The first is at index position 0, and so you want to be able to get this, and so you use array.from. Okay, just pay close attention. Now we want to also get the intro, the p tag with the ID of intro, so that we can change this text. So we'll say constant intro is equal to $sign. So we're doing documents.query selector, so we'll use $sign, and the selector we have has the ID. ID is always the £sign, okay, and is intro like this. So we've gotten this. So what do we want to do? We want to add like an event listener, where when we click on the button, so the click event is what we want to use. So you refer to your week 5 lesson for events, and we want to attach the click events to this, and we're attaching the click events to the button, and we want to change that text when that button is clicked. So we'll now call the variable, which is change button, change text btn dot add event listener, and we want to attach this to the click event. So the button is clicked, and we want to run a function. So we'll just put an empty when we want to use the arrow construct, and in a pair of curly brace we modify the text content. So we'll say the text we want to modify is stored in intro, right? So we'll say intro dot text content is equal to, let's say intro updated. Let's just write change by JavaScript, right? So let's see this, if this works. Let's try it and see. We refresh this, we click this, yeah, it works. Intro updated change by JavaScript. We can decide that we want to update the date, maybe create like set attributes and maybe add highlights. Let's see, what attribute do we want to update? Let's see this, if we have an attribute that is updatable. Let's set a new attribute for this. Let's like want to try to use more of this DOM, and let's see if we can set attributes here. So within this curly brace, this function, let's add more things. Like we want to update an attribute. So we'll say intro dot set attribute. Let's say we have an attribute that is named data updated at, and the value we want to put here is new date. So I'm trying to combine all the things we've done. So let's do this to ISO string, and we also want to maybe add something for visual effects if we want to add highlights. So let's say intro dot class list dot add highlights. So I'm just illustrating this. We will not see much effect about this. When we want, we can add this to the HTML document, but since this is not a HTML course, we'll just stop here. But this is how we can add more things if we want to within the same function. So we've achieved what we wanted here. When we refresh, we'll see that we can always click. Okay, we didn't make this as a toggle for us to see how we change things there. Now let's look at the next thing we want to look at here. We have number 2, the event. We have an ID with name input. So let's just copy this and write it here so we can make it easier. So we have an ID of name input, we have an ID of name preview, and we have an ID of follow toggle. Okay, so we want to make reference to these IDs for us to be able to work on this, and we have an ID of events here. So we pay attention to the HTML elements that holds this ID. The section holds event. The input field, type your name, has an ID of name input. The paragraph tag has a span tag with an ID of name preview, and then we have the button with an ID of color toggle. So how do we achieve this? Let's say we want to collect all of this in a variable first. So the first thing you want to always do is to have these in a variable. So let's get the name input first. So it's item input. All right, so the input field is item input. So let's say constant, let's name it name input is equal to, so it's const name input is equal to, we are getting documents.query selector. So we use this and you use the ID attribute. If you use this class, you use a dot ID, you use a pound sign. So we'll do this and the value is name input like this. And then we have another one, constant name preview, which would now be the name preview here is equal to name preview in the paragraph tag. All right, so we'll say the pound sign name preview, and then we want to now add event listener. So for everything we use events to be able to say when this button is clicked, we want to toggle and do something, right? The name preview is what we want to change, right? We want to get what is stored here and change this span in the name preview. We want to change this stranger to the name that is entered here. So there are different ways you can think about this, but let's do what I'm thinking now. So say name input dot add event listener. So we want to say if, so the event listener we use is the input event listener. When you go back to your class resource for week 5 lesson, you will see that we have a list of several events. So one event we have is input. So we want to see if an input is entered. Let's use the arrow construct. We want to put the parameter e and then the arrow and then the function we want to run here. Let's say in a pair of curly brace we have, maybe we want to do live update. As soon as the text is typed, we want to use, there's a property that we can use, text content, that will change that value. So let's say constant value is equal to e, so the parameter e dot target dot value. So this is how we use it. So let's trim the value first. So in case if there are white spaces, we'll trim that out, and then we'll say the name preview here, we want to change stranger to something else. So we'll say name preview dot, so the name preview we have the value stored here, but want to change it. So name preview dot, so now we use text content with another property is equal to, we're changing it to the value, this value that we've gotten here, and we want to say if the value is equal to stranger, change it to the value, and if it's empty, you leave it as stranger. So say value equal to, let's say question mark, let's do it like this. If value equal to, okay, let's say if the value is empty, you want to, so if the value is empty, you leave it as stranger, because that's what it is here, right? Hello stranger, yeah, you leave it as stranger. But if not, you want to put the value. So we're just using this short ternary operator. You can use if else if you want. All right, so let's see how this will work. One thing else we want to do here is to change the background. When we toggle the button, we want to change the background color too. So let's just change the background one time. Let's test this first so we can know when there's an error and where it comes from. So I'll refresh this, and I want to, on input, when I stop putting input, it's typing straight as I'm typing here. Okay, so now I want to be able to click on this button and the background color will change. So I'm using this to illustrate all of the DOM and the different things that you will encounter. So you have to go to your lesson resource and see all the different methods and properties that we have to access DOM. And when you try to use the document object model different access method, what are the different properties that you can access when you use those methods? You'll find them in your lesson resource, and that's the reason we are doing this lab that can give us a wide range of things that we need to look at. And when you take the advanced course, you'll see how you can interact with the database, and in the future when we start doing Node.js, and you'll see how you can use this also on the server side. So let's look at also the changing of the background. So this will show us how we can work with CSS while we work with JavaScript. So let's say the color, let's say color toggle, let's call this color toggle, and we want to get, this is color toggle here, the button, right? So we want to get that button when the button is clicked, so we can add an event listener to the button. So we'll say documents.query selector, which is represented by the $sign. So is equal to $, and here we'll use the pound sign color toggle like this, and we've gotten this and we stored it here. We want to add an event listener to this, so we'll say color toggle dot add event listener, and we want to add a click event. So when the button is clicked, we want to run this function. All right, so when the button is clicked, we want to say get the class list. Let's do something different. So if this color toggle is clicked, we want to get that and toggle it. So let's say document.body.class list.toggle, and we'll put bg toggle. All right, when we come to CSS here, we have a container class, we have the bg toggle class, and the bg toggle is it gets the class list and it tries to run this, so the background will change to this from the CSS. So what we are doing now is interacting with our CSS file from here, and we want to get the class list. So documents.body. Now we're accessing the whole body of the document here, and we want to get this style. All right. And so when we get this style, we will use it to toggle back and forth with the color. And let's see if this works. And when we refresh and I click on this, it changes the background color. So you can see that we can put a more pronounced color for the style here, so you can see it better. I'll comment this out and I'll change this to background. Let's use red. All right. So when I refresh and I toggle, it's red, so you can see it differently. All right. So I can type my name and toggle. So these are not like you won't build an app that you do something like this, but you will need all of the knowledge of the different properties where you can change things when a button is clicked. You can change color. You can have a customization tab where people can select the color they want for the site, especially when they are colorblind. So you use this to improve your user experience. So let's look at the last one, how we can add and remove things. This add button should work, and when we add an item, it adds and gives us a remove button also. So for this, we'll need to create elements and we need to be able to remove elements. And so we have the different methods and properties that we have, and when we use that method, we can access several properties. What we've been using so far is the query selector, and that's what we'll continue to use throughout this lesson. And so you can use the knowledge you get from here to go further. So let's try to create and remove elements. So here we know the elements we have. We want to be able to add new HTML elements and remove elements. We have the ID is equal to list. We have item input, we have add item, and we have items here. So we want to be adding the li items because we have the another list. We want to add the list items. So normally in HTML, when you have another list, you have list item and then you have a list of all the things you want. But we want these list items to be added by JavaScript when somebody clicks on this or somebody adds. So you can use this for admin dashboard also when you want the user to be the ones to customize a list before you save them in a database or something like that. So let's go to our JavaScript and let's say here we want to have the add item buttons here. We want to get this button. We want to get the item input. We also want to get the item list. So this item list. So this three is what we need. Okay? Item input, add item, and items. So we're going to use them here. So let's say constant. We want to get the button. Let's call this add item button. So we declare this variable. So let's just say btn to make it shorter is equal to documents.query selector, and we want to get any element with the ID attribute and the value of add item. No IDs are unique. Only one element on a page will have that value. And so we want to get the item input. So let's say const item input is equal to, we'll have the $, and we'll have the name here is item input. Put this in a pair of quotes, item input, and then we want to get the list now, the items. So we'll say constant item list will now be equal to, this $, stands for document or query selector. So I'm reminding you over and over again. So if you don't have these helper variables that you've created, you can just use this like this. All right. So we have the ID is items. All right. So now we have all of this stored in the variable. So we can now create, let's use a function this time. Let's create a function that we can use to do all of this. So let's say function create list item, and let's have a parameter we call text. We want to create the list item tag. So we'll say constant list item will now be equal to document dot. So we use the create element method to get that. So we're creating an element and the element name is list item. So this is how we create. If you want to create a div tag, you use div here. So you have to refer to your lesson resource for you to look at a full list of the methods and how you can use them. I have examples in the lesson resource, but we can only do so much in the videos. Okay. So we want to get the class name. We want to put a name for a class, and then we want to put values within the inner HTML between the start and end list item to have those options. So let's say list item dot class name will be equal to item, and we say let's put the date created. So say list item dot dataset dot created is equal to new date dot, we always use two ISO strings so that we can have the same time in our example. And then we want to have, let's say in the inner HTML, we want to say let's use a span tag. So we use this ticks and let's have the HTML span tag. So span, we use the $sign here so that we can refer to the variables. Now I can create a helper function that I will use to maybe escape the text so that we don't have any injection while we are doing this. All right. So I can have this, and let's create a helper function that we want to use to return the string. So we want to just escape the HTML that is typed so that nobody will inject script into our interface. So, and this is for security reason if you are building for production. So if I say function escape HTML, let's make it in lowercase. I will put the string I want to escape here, and what I want to do here is just to return the string and replace different special characters. I want to replace the ampersand, the quotes, the less than or equal to sign. I want to replace them with their entity names or entity numbers. Alright, so we'll say return, let's return the string, and we want to replace, so let's replace pattern, right? So let's do like this ampersand. So we're replacing this with the entity name ampersand. Alright, so we don't want any injection to happen. So just take note of this for the purpose of building for production. We also want to replace the quotes. So we'll replace the, let's say, single quote, right? And we want this to match all. So we don't want it to match only one value, right? We want it to match all. So we want to replace the quotes. Let's replace double quotes first, and we want to replace this with ampersand quotes. So if you're taking the HTML course, you would have done entity names and numbers with symbols, how we get them in HTML. So we want to replace this with the entity numbers. So we'll do that also for single quotes, for less than sign, greater than sign. All right, so this is just like a security thing. So let's say we'll do this for single quotes, we'll do this for the less than sign, and we'll do this for the greater than sign. Anything that people can use to inject or attack your system, you do that so that from the interface they don't type something that have access. So the greater than is ampersand GT, HTML entity, the less than is ampersand LT, and the single quote is ampersand, but let's use the entity number #39. Alright, so you can use entity names or numbers like this. So we have this function. We can now use it here to escape what the person is going to type in so that they don't inject so attacks there. So we say escape HTML, and the text the user types in is what we want to escape. And so when we run this function, it replaces all of these special characters that can be used for injection attacks with their entity names or numbers. Alright, so we want to replace it with this, and then we'll close the span tag. And we also want to have the remove button for that text. So we'll have like button. I'm not sure this will work yet. We'll test it and then we'll see. So button plus equal to remove, and then between the start and end button, we want to remove to be the text that the user will see, and then we close button. So at the end, we want to return the list item like this. So at the end of this whole function, we return the list item. So let's hope that this works. And what we're trying to do is to create an element, the list item tag. So what will happen is between the start and end of the UL tag, we want to have the LI tag, and the LI tag will have a text that the user will enter, and it will close LI, and for as many add that the user clicks, it will continue to create more items. And so we use a function here to be able to sanitize whatever the user types in so that they don't inject scripts. And if you are saving this in a database, this can result to an attack that will expose your system. Alright, so now we have done this to create the item list. We have a button here that will remove. So the next thing we want to do is when we click on the button now, we want to be able to add an event listener that will save the text value and append that. So let's try to use all of those properties and see how it goes. So now we've done this. We want to say add item button, add item btn dot add event listener, and we want to add for the click event. So now we have this function, so we can now use it now for the event listener. So for the click event, we want to do something here. We want to get the text, trim the white spaces. Then if the text is not entered, just return empty. And if a text is entered, we want to create the list item and append the child. So we'll call this function. So we did this in the function to make it easy. So we can call the function here. So we'll say if not text, let's return, and constant list item will now be equal to, we're now going to create list item, calling the function create list item to create the item. Yes, create list item, and we'll pass in the argument, and the argument we want to pass in is the text, right? Because we say let's do a constant text first. Constant text is equal to item input. So we have this text is item input. You can see it here, the item input. This is the text that is going to be here. So constant text is equal to item input dot getting the value, so the value of it, and we'll get the value, and let's trim white spaces, so trim like this. So we've gotten the text, and we now check if the text is empty, just return. Okay, so it should just return. But if not, we want to pass in the text to the inner HTML of the list item. So we'll say items list. So this another list is stored in a variable called item items list here. So we'll now say call that item list dot append child. So this is another method that we use to append the li item that we just created. So we created the li, we want to append this now to this. So this is going to be the parent, and anything that comes between the start and end is a child element. All right, so that's how it is in the document tree. So we append child, the li. This li that we are appending already has the text in the start and end value. All right, so let's say item input. So now we want to clear the value of the input field. When you do that, once it appends the things to the list here, we want to clear this input for another one. So we'll say item input dot value. We'll set the value to empty. So let's just set it to an empty quote like this. So let's refresh our page and test this. So we can see how we wrote this long. We try to use a function here to create a list item so that we don't have to do it within the event listener here. So let's go back to our web page, refresh, and what we want to achieve is when I type in here, let's write list item and let's write, we'll just write names, and I click on add. It's not responding, so there is something wrong with our code. So let's come back to the code to see. We first of all got this item btn and add item. This is the value of the id attribute. We have the item input, and then here we have the item list. So let's see how we got it there. Okay, we put items list here instead of item list. So here is where the problem is. So here is item list. So we can just put items list here to make it plural, and then so items, sorry, it's going to be items list. So here is where the mistake happened. So let's refresh and see, and let me type the name and click on add. He added it. If I click on remove, it doesn't remove, so we'll have to create a new event listener to remove here. So I can add more, and let's say Jane, let's type Jane Doe, and I click on add, it adds it. So we want to write something that can remove this. So let's create a new event listener here for removing. So we just want to be toggling the class list to be able to remove. So let's look at this style. Okay, so we can just do it without accessing CSS. Let's do it like this. We have the items list, right? And this is what is appended, and this is what we want to remove. So let's say items list dot add event listener, and we want to add click, because now we're adding a click event to this button here on the item list, right? So we want to say add item list dot add event listener click, and once the button is clicked, we want to do something. So let's put a parameter and say e, and we want to look at the matches for the target, and then we want to remove it. So let's say if e dot target dot matches. So let's say if e dot target dot matches button remove. We have this class remove here for the remove button, and so we want to see if it matches the remove button. So it matches button dot remove. All right, so if it matches the remove button, we want to remove that element. So we say is equal to e dot target dot, let's get the closest li for the remove button, and then we want to just remove it and say li dot remove. So let me explain this again. All of these methods and properties are available when you try to access the DOM object. And when we want to remove an event listener, we need to use this add event listener because we are going to be clicking on a button. So we want to add a listener for this button remove. Now, when we created the list item tag, we created a button and the class attribute has a value of remove, and so here we want to add event listener click for the remove button, right? And we want to get the parameter, which is the button that is clicked, and we want to say if e.target.matches a button with the value remove button.remove, then we want to get the list item is going to be the target.closest. So these are all properties that we can access, methods that we can access with the DOM, and we want to get the list item tag, and then we want to remove that list item from there. So when I refresh my page and I type my name, add, it adds. I'll type another name, Jane Doe, add. I'll type another name, John Brown, add. And now let's remove this. Let's remove Jane Doe, and so it removes Jane Doe. So why I use the closest here is to take the list item tag that has that remove button, so it doesn't delete every list item tag. All right, if I put li.remove, it will remove all the list item, so we can remove that. So you can see how we achieve this. So we use this lab for you to understand the different DOM manipulation that we can have, and there are several methods and properties of the DOM object, different ways to access them. Your course resource contains all of the different methods and the different properties you can access. How you can access the parent, the child, and the sibling when you use the elements.parent node, elements.child node, node, elements.children, elements.firstchild, lastchild, next sibling, previous sibling. And then if you want to access only elements, you can say first element child, last element child. And if you want to handle events in them, we have seen the different events that we can have. So the common events that we use is when we want to load, resize, and scroll a window, submit a form, change color on focus of an input field. We want to see when a keyboard is pressed, when a mouse is clicked, and all of those things. Alright, so you can refer to your lesson resource to get a cheat sheet of the different methods and the description of the methods, and then the different practical examples that we have that you can use to change background colors when you add a container to the page and add items into the container. This already gives you a wide range of examples when we try to add JavaScript to a web page. In the next lesson, we are going to look at the browser object mode. Thank you and see you in the next lesson.